Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We've got a really, what I hope is interesting and quite a challenging series of presentations to run through, and an opportunity for some panel discussion and to see some physical activity as well out in the drinks area. Hopefully you've had a chance to see some of the things we have on display. My name is Richard Kewarden. I'm the director of the TRL Academy. I really hope today, we've got a whole wide range of people gathered. We've got people from universities, from academia, from industry, quite a lot of people represented from local and national government. And I'm hoping we can have a really good debate around what we know and perhaps come to some agreement on what we don't know. And that's a really interesting thing to be able to do with a group of quite diverse people. Because if we can do that, we can hopefully act as a bit of a catalyst to start forming our thinking. So the TRL Academy is an interesting part of TRL. I like to think of it as being the most important part because I'm responsible for it. But essentially, the TRL Academy is there to make sure that TRL is match fit, is ready for our business 2, 3, 4 years from now. So it's there to make sure we're investing in the right areas, we're getting the right people, we're following projects, we're looking at the right innovations that will mean that we as a business can grow and sustain the areas we work in. And TRL, as I'm sure all of you know, is fairly well known for the information and knowledge that we generate. And we're really keen to share that. A big part of our brand, if you will, is the fact that we share information. You can go on our website, we publish quarterly reports. I think we have the new quarterly report is here today in hard copy. We have a whole published project report section. The knowledge we generate, we like to, where we can, share. And we hope you use it. And indeed, this session today, we're going to take notes and we're going to write it up and we're going to produce a report. So if you want to be named or you want to stand up and ask a great question, please do. The innovation is something that every organisation talks about, but innovation in transport now has really hit potentially a revolution if we think about the changes we're seeing in the way that we're all going to get around, the way we're using digital data, the way that our population is changing. And we've got some fantastic presentations today that are going to really talk us through some of those changes and some of the challenges that we're going to see. And if I was giving this presentation a few weeks ago, I'd have a picture of 3 trucks platooning because I just finished a whole lot of media work around that project. But we're a little bit later on, so the current thing that I'm very proud of, or TRL are very proud of, is our Smart Mobility Living Lab. So we're now entering into a phase where we're going to be testing connected and autonomous vehicles and different mobility services, so mobility and transport as a service, on the streets of London live, and looking at the safety case and looking how users will use those facilities. And a lot of you will be familiar with our Gateway project, which has already been doing this for some time. But what's really interesting about that sort of innovation and new technology is where do the people fit into it? And I'm really hoping that a lot of today will be about, so what does that mean? What we don't want is to introduce new technologies that mean that we take away some of the cycling and walking that we've seen actually encouraged in our urban environments. TRL keeps renewing what we call our thought leadership areas. There's the ones that my predecessor, Nick Reed, really has pioneered. We've connected on autonomous vehicles and done a great job. Thanks, Nick. We're still doing it. We're still working in that area. It's really important. But we're also working in smart cities. We're also continuing to work, and Dennis is here today, on electric vehicles and low-emission vehicles, because all of these things fit together, and all of that's perhaps underpinned by data. And by the way, don't forget the infrastructure. How are we going to have a pavement of the future that we can maintain cost-effectively and look after? And the interplay between all of these things is where we think an awful lot of future research will be required. And the Academy has one last really great function. TRL's a great place to work for many reasons, but one of the really good reasons is that we don't have shareholders. We have a foundation, and so our profit is reinvested in our own original research. So if you work at TRL, you can apply to do a PhD, or you can apply to do a research project, and we fund, in a competition format, projects. And the reason for doing this is then we're hopefully positioning ourselves to be able to do new work in the future. So we have over 10 PhD students at the moment, and I want to grow that. I want to do more and more of this sort of thing. So if you're interested in this, please come and talk to me. And we have different levels of maturity in the sorts of projects we're talking about. Okay, the symposium, healthy mobility, it just about covers it all, doesn't it? And I don't want to talk too much about the individual elements because I'll steal from all the different presenters. But I want to come back to this innovation and this changing marketplace again very quickly. What we're seeing is a huge shift away from traditional automotive play. We're seeing a lot more electric vehicles. We're seeing governments and local authorities say that diesel cars won't be allowed, won't be manufactured, won't be permitted in cities or be allowed to be sold by year X. We're seeing more connectivity, we're seeing automation. Ford on their website talk about a car they're going to mass produce in 2021 for ride hailing, which will have no steering wheel and no pedals. That's 2021. And we're seeing a big growth in shared mobility. So what does all that mean when we look at today's challenges? In a global context, we kill about 1.3 million people, or probably more that we can count at the moment in the world. That's between 3,000 and 4,000 people a day are dying on the world's roads, over 500 children a day that we know of, and these will be underestimates, around 1,700 and 1,800 people in the UK. So we've got an absolutely horrendous problem in terms of safety with the growth of the motormobile, and we do not believe that automation is going to solve all those problems. It will help, but it's not going to solve it all. This was a report that was published last week from the OECD that put the UK in Western Europe at the top of the obesity charts, and of course the Sadiq Khan and the whole air quality debate and all the other people who talk about it. This is actually in the policy for London. If you listen to his speeches, he talks about we are poisoning Londoners. All 32 boroughs do not meet the EC's air quality rules. So we've got some really major health challenges, and this afternoon is all about looking at those, perhaps differently than I've done before. So I'm a vehicle safety guy. I've spent a lot of time looking at how we can look at vehicle safety, but perhaps it's time that we get out of those silos a little bit and start looking at the whole problem, the whole of health and mobility, and think what we can learn from each other, and that's what I'm really hoping we're going to do this afternoon. So that's me. I'm now going to hand over to Marcus, who I hope is absolutely ready to go. So Marcus, for those of you who don't know, is head of the cleaner transport modes at TRL. And Marcus is going to set the scene for us really today, running through. I'll hand over to Marcus.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. What I wanted to do today was just give a kind of overview and introduction to the speakers that will follow. So I'm going to sort of give an overview of the general areas of active travel and the importance to public health policy and other areas of policy. A lot of the detail will be covered by subsequent presentations, so I'm going to not necessarily go into all the detail, but I'll skim over things, but highlight what I think are the key topics. So starting off, what is active travel? Now, I think for the purpose of this discussion, we're focusing on modes where some effort is required in making what I call purposeful journeys here, or day-to-day journeys. So we're not talking about sports, we're not talking about walking the dog or going for a bike ride in the country. We're talking about cycling or walking to work, or walking to school, which are the more obvious ones. And then, less obviously, public transport journeys also involve cycling or walking very often as access. And actually, within the public transport journey, there's often a lot more walking than people recognise. Also, a lot of running around sometimes if you're trying to catch a train at Reading or Birmingham New Street. And often a lot of standing as well. So actually, there's more effort required for what are sometimes viewed as less active modes than there is if you're driving door to door. Also, in recent years, we started to see other interesting new modes starting to appear, and it's not yet clear where they will fit into the overall travel behaviours, but things like electric bikes that have the potential for increasing the catchment area that people are willing to cycle. So even though less effort is required, people are likely to cycle further and more often. And then there's small scooters, some of which are electrically assisted. Things like segways, which are treated as a bit of a gimmick at the moment, but they and other forms of electrically assisted travel could start to become important, particularly in cities, and could start to fill the gap between walking and cycling and other modes. So let's look briefly at the benefits of active travel. Now, I know subsequent speakers are going to cover this in a lot more detail, but first of all, we think about the benefits to the user. And there's a very large body of evidence now that the physical activity that you can get through active travel can lead to a whole load of personal health benefits, in particular reduced heart disease, reduced risk of stroke, and also benefits to mental health. There's quite a strong link between increased physical activity and reduced depression. Clearly, it gives people a greater range of choices in how they travel. Obviously, walking and cycling are quite low cost, and if walking and cycling become easier, then it opens up a number of other options. So people have more choice, which gives them more access to the things that they need. And also, there's reduced costs. If people can cycle instead of driving or taking public transport, then that could be quite a personal benefit to them. Then we have the reduced impacts on others. If people aren't driving, then they're imposing far less danger on other people. They're creating far less noise, and they're creating little or no pollution. These then aggregate together to give benefits to society. So we have reduced health costs, which is very important to the NHS at the moment. We have reduced traffic congestion, which leads to economic benefits. And by giving people more travel choices, we can improve accessibility and thus make it easier for people to get people to come to work, to come to their shops and reach leisure facilities. And often neglected, but walking and cycling as access modes to public transport potentially greatly increase the catchment area for which public transport provides viable journeys in comparison with driving, which thus makes public transport itself more economically sustainable. As I said, there's a lot of evidence now for the benefits of active travel, and this has started to feed through into policy making. I've got a few examples here on the slide. A fairly recent study that was done for the GLA concluded that 60% of the minimum level of active travel that Londoners need for their health could be met by walking and cycling. A very large study in Copenhagen in 2000, the Copenhagen Heart Study, concluded that 3 hours of cycle commuting a week can have this very large 28% reduction in all-cause mortality. And I stress all-cause because that includes accidents, so the benefits to the individual of more activity outweigh any benefits from any greater risks of accidents. This has then fed into two important areas. First of all, we see recommendations for the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence recommending, as have the UK's chief medical officers, that walking and cycling become the normal modes of transport and become encouraged for their health benefits. This evidence has also fed into transport appraisal, such that if you assess the benefits of a walking or cycling scheme using the DFT's standard appraisal guidance, you'll get very significant benefits to society arising from the reduced public health costs. And these tend to be about two-thirds of the benefits from a cycling scheme are often come from the physical health benefits. So if you think, what is actually needed then to encourage more of this? Why aren't people doing this already? Well, starting from a strategic level in terms of what are the reasons that drive people's choices, people's travel choices. First of all, we need forms of development that reduce travel distances and support walking, cycling and public transport. As we've known over years, increasingly car-based development, urban sprawl, also the trend towards greater travel distances to work and to shops, inherently make it harder for people to walk or cycle. The next level down is if we look at the physical environment that people have to travel in. Historically, it's been very much designed to favour car travel, and that has actually disadvantaged walking and cycling, and I'll show a few examples in a minute. There's also some questions about the regulatory and attitudinal changes needed towards vulnerable road users. Historically, the approach in this country has tended to be that it is the responsibility of the vulnerable road users to keep out of the way of the motor vehicles. In, say, the Netherlands, there is much more responsibility on the user of the vehicle that creates the risk towards avoiding the risk on others. Also, there's a need for supportive transport services, interchanges and facilities. So cycling and walking need to work with other modes and supportive facilities. I mentioned briefly the forms of development. This chart was produced for the Commission for Integrated Transport, and what it shows is how urban density has a very, very big effect on travel. So at higher population densities, so the ones to the right, travel distances are shorter, public transport is more viable, there's more people in the catchment area, car parking and roads are more restricted, so the amount of car use does actually drop. That is not the only driver of travel choice, but it is an important one. The interesting one is the one on the end, which is the rural communities, where people seem to travel less overall. This pattern applies globally. This is based on some work by Ken Worthy a few years ago, which just shows how the more sprawled and spread out the form of development, so the lower the urban density, the more journeys people make by car. So clearly at the very top level, the way we design our cities and the way we develop our land use has a very important impact on travel choices. And it's very hard to change that. Nonetheless, there are things that we can do with what we've got. And a really important change in attitudes to urban design that's taken place over the last few years has been this idea that we need to recognise that streets and roads, particularly in built-up areas, have more than one function. They're not solely about getting people from A to B by motor vehicles. They have a place function and a movement function. And this diagram here comes from the Roads Task Force and has been fed through to TfL's urban design guidance. And what you see is that up in this corner here, we have vehicular traffic, we have arterial roads and motorways outside the cities. Their function is on the movement of vehicles, and therefore you maximise traffic capacity. Whereas down on the bottom right, we have urban centres, city places, and the place function is more important. And in those areas, local transport solutions are much more appropriate. And this has made a very big difference when applied into how we design streets, because it says explicitly in an area that serves local purposes and local needs, we should expect to design for less traffic capacity, lower speeds, and better places for people on foot and on bicycle. This has also been reflected in street guidance. So this is taken from Manual for Streets that came out a few years ago, which just shows how a basic thing like the turning circle that you build into roads makes a very big difference to how easy it is for pedestrians to get around. The traditional approach is to make very wide, tapered side road turnings to minimise the traffic impacts on the main road of vehicles turning and to reduce shunt accidents. But what that has the effect of doing is to position the pedestrian in a very difficult place in terms of seeing approaching traffic. It also means that drivers are cutting across at a very high speed with pedestrians in the blind spot. And the really big changeover in design approach that comes into Manual for Streets is that if you design streets as they used to accommodate higher speeds in a view that that is safer, people will drive faster, and that makes it more dangerous for pedestrians and cyclists. If you turn that around and you design with tight geometry and narrow streets, and you give the impression that the space is for people on foot, then rather than making it more dangerous, actually drivers, because they have sense, respond to what they see, and you get a much more comfortable environment with lower speeds. Of course, even though there's been a lot more work and development going into providing infrastructure, people have become cynical over many years of the quality of what's been produced. And here are some examples. We've all seen this kind of thing. Cyclists and pedestrians pushed onto the footway, the street furniture is all on the footway, the signposts are all on the footway. You have a loss of continuity, a loss of permeability, a loss of priority. So people are very cynical about this. However, there's an awful lot of new approaches that are really positive and we're starting to see. I've got some examples here. A Copenhagen-style segregated but slightly raised cycle track from Brighton. Here we have a Dutch-style roundabout that we trialled on the TRL test track a few years ago, which reverses the priorities, so that drivers have to expect that cyclists and pedestrians will be crossing the exits. We have approaches like shared spaces that explicitly say that streets are not just about vehicles, they have a number of functions and all road users are entitled to use the same space. And then finally, integration, and here we have an example of where a lot more effort has gone into providing cycle parking at stations and other interchange facilities. And this has led to one of two successes I want to illustrate briefly here. The first is that there has been a lot of investment in cycle parking at stations, and this has led to a 70% increase in the number of people parking cycles at stations to 2015. This is across the country. It's shown in this chart here that shows the number of rail journeys involving a bicycle. This is some analysis that we did using National Travel Survey and Rail Passenger Survey data. The effort this increase in cycle parking, a lot of it was due to cycle rail grant funding that the Department for Transport gave to the industry through the Cycle Rail Working Group. Conrad Haig, who's sitting here at the front, was instrumental in managing that. So if anyone wants to talk to him in the breaks, then you know who he is. A second success story, which we'll hear more about from TfL shortly, but this just shows how putting in the infrastructure, putting in the resources, has led to a really big increase in the number of cyclists in London. And there's a whole lot more has gone in, so we can expect that to continue to grow. So this has been a major success story, and that is in turn leading to increased physical activity and health benefits. So just to close then, I've got some pictures here that a colleague of mine, Mark Strong, was in the audience, provided from a study of European infrastructure. This is what it actually looks like in places that have lots of people cycling and lots walking. And I think a few points to note. First of all, they don't see themselves as cyclists. It's an everyday activity. They're going around in their normal clothes. They're not wearing specialist kit. And most of them aren't wearing high-vis and all the rest of it. It's just an everyday, safe way of getting around. But also, you don't see lots of blue paint, you don't see lots of blue signs anywhere. There is cycling infrastructure here, but it's often quite understated, and there's a lot of sharing with other travel. So this is kind of where we're going here, and it can be done. It's done in other countries, and it's been increasingly done in this country. So I'm looking forward to the following presentations, because where a lot more detail on these success stories will be shown to you. So thank you very much. Without any further ado, we shall move on to the next.
And just before Marcus does go, there's time probably for one question or two, if there's any questions. If not, there's the question at the back. Do we have any microphones? Jane's just bringing a microphone now. If you just wait 1 second, we'll just get the microphone. Is that okay? Thank you.
I drafted a report for the House of Commons Transport Committee on walking over 15 years ago, saying almost the same things that you've said today. There has been little progress, but why has so little happened in the last 15 years? And why should we really believe that anything substantial is going to change now?
Do you want to go with that, Marcus?
I'm more positive than that. I think that we are now starting to see improvements. It's not moving as fast, certainly, as I would like, personally, but I think we are starting to see things that work now. Whereas previously we only saw the horrors that I showed in that earlier slide, and that's still the basis of cycling and walking provision in a lot of local authorities. But we're seeing in London in particular that a much higher standard is now expected. The challenge is to get that implemented.
Thanks, Marcus. There's down the front, if you could just say your name and where you're from, and then the question, that'd be really good. I think I said in my intro, we're recording the day, and so we're going to write this up. So it's really helpful to know who's speaking. Thank you.
Kit Mitchell. I was at TRL for about 25 years. Walking. We all know a number of walk trips have come down in the last 20 years or so. I've recently done an analysis for IHT which shows that the modal share of journeys under 1 mile long has stayed pretty constant at between 75 and 80%. What has happened is the total number of journeys under 1 mile we make by all modes has well over halved in the since 1985, and that's why we're not walking so much. And basically, if we want to get people walking more, we've got to make the infrastructure better, but above all, we've got to get the land use planning so that there are places for people to walk to within about a mile distance.
Yeah, I agree, that's very important, and that's the story of those population density charts that lie behind that. Okay.
Marcus, that's great. I'm really sorry. What I should say, we're going to have to move to the next speaker now. So Marcus, thank you.
Okay, thank you.